It's the most powerful conventional weapon on the planet. It has more destructive capacity than we can even fully calculate. The Postal of MIT is in the process of doing that, but the technologies being used and the physics involved are beyond the imagination in the West. We just haven't thought about how to do this in this manner. The Russians have hit us with a unique weapon that we can't shoot down or interdict, and when it hits us, it kills us. For all those out there saying, well, it's just an experimental missile, there's no need to worry about it, I'm here to tell you right now that it may be an experimental design, but the components of this missile already exist. Many of them are in serial production, and most of them have been produced. Welcome to our battlefield analysis on day 108 of the Russia-Ukraine war. Today we delve into a whirlwind of developments spanning the last few days, explosions underground, missiles piercing through bunkers, and political maneuvering at the highest levels. This is a war that now teeters on the edge of global escalation. As Mr. Scott Ritter has noted, this conflict is not just a battle of arms, but one of narratives. The power to shape public opinion is proving as decisive as the missiles on the battlefield. The recent strike on the Yash factory in Dnipro was not just a military operation, it was a message, a statement of Russia's growing dominance in precision missile technology. This facility, which had been repurposed into a vital hub for Ukrainian and Western defense projects, was reduced to ruins in what can only be described as a surgical strike. At the heart of this operation was the Oreshnik missile, a state-of-the-art system designed for unparalleled effectiveness. Unlike traditional munitions, the Oreshnik doesn't rely on explosive warheads. Instead, it uses advanced kinetic energy penetrators that harness hypersonic velocity, achieving speeds of up to Mach 12. This staggering speed allows the warheads to generate devastating impact forces capable of obliterating even the most fortified underground structures. Reports indicate that the missile penetrated several layers of reinforced concrete and soil, completely destroying Yuzhmash's underground production facilities. What makes this even more remarkable is the absence of any massive surface explosions. Footage of the attack shows no traditional fireballs or shockwaves visible above ground. Experts attribute this to the controlled kinetic detonation deep below the surface, ensuring all destructive force was concentrated on the underground infrastructure. Yuzhmash was no ordinary factory. It was once a Soviet-era cornerstone for ballistic missile development. Following Ukraine's independence, the plant became a centerpiece of Ukraine's strategic partnership with Western defense giants, including Northrop Grumman. The Americans invested heavily in the facility, supporting the production of Neptune anti-ship missiles, Grom-2 ballistic missiles, and cutting-edge UAV systems. And yet, despite years of effort and significant investment, one strike, just one experimental Oreshnik missile, reduced this collaborative dream to ashes. Intelligence reports confirm that critical assembly lines, material stockpiles, and production blueprints were irreparably lost. This isn't just a setback, it's a monumental blow to Ukraine's defense industry and its Western allies. Former UN weapons inspector Scott Ritter has noted that such targeted strikes reflect a broader Russian strategy of systematically dismantling Ukraine's military-industrial complex, ensuring that Western aid can only delay, not reverse, the inevitable outcome of this conflict. If this was a warning shot, it was definitely loud and unmistakably clear. And while Ukraine scrambles to recover from this blow, the ripple effects of Oreshnik's success have sent shockwaves through NATO's strategic planning. Faced with the implications of the Oreshnik strike, NATO has responded with heightened rhetoric and aggressive plans for escalation. Discussions that were once confined to back rooms have now become public debates. The alliance is openly considering supplying Ukraine with medium-range missile systems, such as the AGM-158 JAS-SM. These advanced missiles boast ranges between 360 and 900 kilometers, making them capable of striking deep into Russian territory. But this isn't the end of NATO's ambitions. In an alarming twist, some officials are now floating the idea of equipping Ukraine with nuclear capabilities, a move that would represent an unprecedented escalation in this already volatile conflict. This level of recklessness has raised eyebrows even within NATO itself. The risks of such actions, both strategic and existential, have not gone unnoticed. Mr. Scott Ritter, a former UN weapons inspector and prominent analyst, has consistently warned against NATO's provocative strategy. He argues that these steps are pushing dangerously close to Russia's red lines. Ritter points out that arming Ukraine with weapons capable of threatening Russian territory directly undermines any hope of de-escalation. His concerns are now being echoed, albeit cautiously, by certain factions within Western policy circles. Yet despite these warnings, NATO seems intent on doubling down. Statements from top officials have taken on an increasingly combative tone. NATO's military planners appear to believe that overwhelming firepower can neutralize the technological advantages demonstrated by Russia's Oreshnik missile. However, this optimism ignores critical realities: Russia's ability to preemptively strike with unparalleled precision and its growing arsenal of advanced hypersonic weapons. It's not just NATO officials making waves. The United States, which spearheads the alliance, has hinted at further steps to defend European security. There's talk of deploying additional strategic bombers, naval assets, and Patriot air defense systems across Eastern Europe. These moves, while framed as defensive measures, are clearly designed to pressure Russia and reassure NATO's eastern members. But reassurance is not the same as safety. As Ritter has noted, this tit-for-tat escalation risks spiraling out of control. One miscalculation, one unintended provocation, could trigger a catastrophic chain reaction. And while NATO continues to walk this tightrope, Moscow is already preparing for the inevitable next stage of this high-stakes confrontation. As NATO toys with fire, Moscow is preparing for the inevitable escalation with a calculated but uncompromising strategy. In response to NATO's saber-rattling, Russia is fortifying its alliances and sharpening its arsenal, ensuring it has multiple avenues to counter the West's escalating measures. This isn't a reactionary strategy, it's a meticulously planned response that has been years in the making. Agreements with Belarus, North Korea, and Iran are central to this effort. Belarus, long considered a reliable ally, now hosts tactical nuclear weapons under Moscow's control. These deployments serve both as a deterrent and as a stark reminder to NATO that any aggression against Belarus will be treated as a direct threat to Russia itself. Belarus's geographic proximity to NATO's eastern flank makes it a key strategic asset, amplifying its importance in the ongoing conflict. Meanwhile, Iran and North Korea play critical roles in technology transfer and manpower. Iran's contributions include advanced drone technologies and ballistic missile expertise, while North Korea has reportedly provided artillery shells and other munitions to bolster Russian supply lines. These partnerships demonstrate Russia's ability to leverage non-traditional allies in its broader geopolitical struggle against NATO. Adding to this complex equation is the emerging rumor of a potential proxy state in Russia's northern territories. This proposed autonomous region, located in a sparsely populated and strategically isolated area, could serve as a launch pad for retaliatory strikes. The idea is simple, yet chilling: create a legally ambiguous entity that operates with plausible deniability. Much like NATO's reliance on Ukraine as a proxy, this state could carry out aggressive actions while allowing Moscow to maintain a degree of separation. Such a tactic mirrors Western strategies but with a uniquely Russian twist. By positioning this entity in a remote northern region, Russia would shield its core territories while still maintaining offensive capabilities. The geography of this area, combined with Russia's existing missile defense systems, would make any counterstrike by NATO extraordinarily difficult. Scott Ritter, the former UN weapons inspector, has commented on this aspect of Russia's strategy, noting that its emphasis on preemptive deterrence and unconventional tactics reflects a clear understanding of modern warfare dynamics. Ritter points out that this approach not only neutralizes NATO's technological advantages, but also forces Western planners to reconsider their next moves carefully. As the alliances between Russia and its partners solidify, the strategic landscape of this conflict grows increasingly complex. These moves are not just about immediate gains, they are about reshaping the balance of power in ways that will reverberate long after this conflict ends. But while alliances strengthen and missiles are readied, the battlefield itself tells a different story, a story of relentless Russian advances on the ground. Russia continues its methodical advance, capitalizing on superior strategy, technological edge, and overwhelming firepower. Over the last week alone, Russian forces have reclaimed 235 square kilometers of contested territory, an impressive feat that underscores their dominance in key areas. This marks one of the fastest periods of territorial acquisition since the war began. November has been particularly favorable for Russia. In just under a month, its forces have brought more than 600 square kilometers under their control, a significant increase from the previous month's gains. These advancements are concentrated in the newly integrated regions where Russian forces are fortifying their positions and securing supply lines. The contrast with Ukraine's situation couldn't be starker. Ukrainian forces are stretched thin, grappling with dwindling resources and mounting casualties. Reports from the front lines describe a growing sense of fatigue and demoralization among Ukrainian troops, who are increasingly aware of the strategic disadvantages they face. A recent survey conducted by Ukraine's National Institute of Social Research paints an even bleaker picture. According to the data, 78% of Ukrainians now support freezing the conflict or pursuing peace talks. This overwhelming sentiment reflects a clear desire to end the war, even if it means compromising on some of Ukraine's stated goals. Out of those surveyed, 64% specifically advocate for immediate peace negotiations, citing the unbearable toll the war has taken on their country. This shift in public opinion highlights a critical vulnerability in Ukraine's war effort. As former EU weapons inspector Scott Ritter has often remarked, wars are rarely won solely on the battlefield. They are won or lost in the hearts and minds of the people. For Ukraine, the erosion of public support represents a significant and perhaps insurmountable challenge. The contrast with Russia is stark. Despite facing sanctions and international isolation, Moscow has maintained high levels of domestic support for its military operations. This unity allows Russian forces to operate with a level of cohesion and purpose that Ukraine increasingly struggles to match. As winter approaches, these dynamics are likely to intensify. Russia's control over critical infrastructure in newly captured areas will give it a strategic advantage during the colder months, further straining Ukraine's already fragile position. The battle for hearts and minds is as important as the fight on the ground, and right now, Russia holds the upper hand in both arenas. While Zelensky faces mounting internal dissent, his Western allies are beginning to realize that this war's toll is unsustainable. The Western alliance is becoming harder to ignore. European nations, already grappling with inflation, energy shortages, and widespread public discontent, now face a more terrifying prospect: the specter of direct Russian retaliation. Protests have erupted in several European capitals, with citizens demanding an end to what they increasingly view as an unnecessary and self-destructive war. From Berlin to Paris, demonstrators are calling out their governments for prioritizing Ukraine over domestic stability. Many question the rationale behind NATO's escalatory measures, which appear to bring Europe closer to the line of direct conflict without clear benefits. Economic pressures add fuel to the fire. Sanctions against Russia have backfired in many cases, driving up energy prices and disrupting supply chains. European industries, particularly in Germany and France, are struggling to compete as manufacturing costs skyrocket. The once lauded unity of NATO is showing signs of strain, with smaller member states quietly expressing frustration over being drawn into a conflict that primarily serves the interests of the United States. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, dissatisfaction is brewing within the United States itself. Whispers of discontent among policy circles and the general public suggest growing fatigue with the Biden administration's strategy. Former President Donald Trump has remained conspicuously silent, leaving analysts to speculate on his motives. Is he calculating how to leverage this quagmire for political gain, or is he deliberately distancing himself from a conflict he sees as a liability? Whatever the case, his silence speaks volumes. At the same time, Biden's administration continues to double down, clinging to a failing strategy. Emboldened by hawkish think tanks like Victoria Nuland's Institute for the Study of War, Washington persists in its narrative that fighting to the last Ukrainian is the only viable path. This approach has drawn sharp criticism even within some Western circles, with skeptics warning that such rhetoric only prolongs the suffering and destabilizes the global order further. Scott Ritter, the former UN weapons inspector, has observed that these fractures within the Western alliance are not mere coincidences but symptoms of a deeper miscalculation. Ritter argues that NATO's overreach and inability to adapt its strategy to the realities on the ground are creating rifts that Moscow will undoubtedly exploit. The question now is not whether NATO can hold firm but for how much longer. The war has transformed from a regional conflict to a global reckoning, testing the resolve of nations and the unity of alliances. As protests grow louder, economic pressures mount and strategic blunders accumulate, one must wonder how far NATO will go before the costs become unbearable. The war in Ukraine has entered a perilous new phase, one defined not by incremental skirmishes, but by high-stakes brinkmanship. NATO's recklessness, Ukraine's desperation, and Russia's resolve form a deadly triad that threatens to spiral into global catastrophe. Scott Ritter recently remarked that this conflict is fast approaching a breaking point where diplomatic solutions may become impossible. His words ring ominously true as the world watches the situation spiral ever closer to the brink. But history has shown us one undeniable truth: the side that remains steadfast, that understands the value of time and strategy, ultimately prevails. Russia appears to be that side for now. The world watches, but the question remains: how much longer before this proxy war becomes something far more devastating? This has been your battlefield update on day 108 of the Russia-Ukraine war. Stay tuned for more as we uncover the realities behind the headlines.